Okay, so we're gonna start again from the Gimel Amud Aleph 3a1. It's the third line in the Gemara. So the Mishnah says if an egg was born, I guess it's like Budweiser, born on date. So so the Eggweiser, born on Yontif. Beis Shammai says it can be eaten, Beis Hillel says it can't be eaten. So the Gemara says what are we talking about? If it's a chicken that a hen that you have to shacht because it could be shafted, it's not muktzah because it has a purpose on Yantif. So if it lays an egg, something that comes from a food is also a food. So there's no reason why the egg should be forbidden according to Beis Hillel. And if the chicken is um, you have the chicken to lay eggs, so it's muktzah because you're you're not planning on using it for food on Yantif. So how could Beis Shammai say it's mutter? And then we spoke about do they reject parts of muktzah? So we had three answers so far. The first answer is that Rav Nachman said that Beis Shammai holds a lenient opinion of muktzah, and I might be wrong about this, but for them, let's say you had a lamp. So while the flame was burning, it's completely you can't even touch it because you bring more oil to the wick and that's increasing the fire, or get it away from the wick and it's decreasing the fire and it's the derisa. But once it burns out, is it still mutter or not? So I think Rabbi Shimon holds it's mutter and Rabbi Yehuda says it's aser. So Rabbi Nachman holds that Beis Shammai holds this more lenient thing of muktzah. Once the part of muktzah is over, it's not muktzah anymore. So the chicken is muktzah, but now the egg is separated from the chicken. It's kind of similar to the 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 lamp, the lantern, whatever, going out. So any oil that remains, oh, I'm going to take a little oil out of there and put it on my salad. So now that the egg is separated from the muktzah chicken, but it's not part of the muktzah chicken anymore, and I can use the egg to coat my schnitzel or to make an omelet, whatever. So that's the first answer. And then we had some questions about against Rav Nachman that if so, the chicken itself, you should be able to change it on Yantif. And even though before Yantif started, it was an egg laying hen, and now you decide you're going to chef it, it should be okay also. So that was a question against about Rav Nachman. So he said to show you the power of Beis Hillel that they forbid even this, and the leniency of Beis Shammai to even permit that. So that was the first answer. The second answer was Rabbi, and Rabbi has a special opinion about you have to prepare the day before Shabbos or Yontif for the Shabbos or Yontif. So if the egg got laid on and Rabbi says we're talking about Yontif is on Sunday, so the egg that got laid on Sunday was on Yontif, which was it was already ready inside the chicken on Shabbos, and and so because it wasn't prepared on a weekday day, but it was prepared on Shabbos, we're not allowed to eat it. And then there's gezeros. We decree whether Shabbos is on whether if Yantif would be on Friday and Shabbos on and then Shabbos or Shabbos. So you can never have the egg. And then the third opinion we saw explanation for the Mishnah was Rav Yosef at the end of share last time. So if fruit, you're not allowed to pick fruit because that's it's harvesting. I mean, it's not harvesting wheat with a sickle or whatever, but it's when you're separating it from the way it's growing, that's harvesting. So picking an apple off a tree or whatever is also if it's not the av, then it's a very strong tolda. And and but let's say that it fell itself, was on the ground. So rabbinically, you're not allowed to use that fruit because if we allow you to use the fruit, you might come to pick one and be over the eraisa, which is not a good thing. So just like the fruit separated from the tree, even though it's separated by itself, we're not allowed to use it because of the xera. Maybe you're going to pick a fruit yourself, so you can't take the egg that was laid by itself to remind us that any agricultural stuff, even a fruit that fell off the tree itself, we're not allowed to on Yom Tov, we're not allowed to use it because when Yom Tov started, it was connected to the tree. So we're on the third line on Gimel Amud Aleph. The fourth and final explanation of the case in our Mishnah. Rabbi Yitzchak Omer Gzer Mishum Mashkin Shazavu. Rabbi Yitzchak says you're not allowed to use the egg because it's exera to a case of where you had juice that flowed out or that seeped out of a fruit. So whether it's a grape, so midiraisa in regard to Hilchos Shabbos, grapes and grapes and olives, they were grown for the wine inside and for the oil inside of the olives. So in regard to Hilchos Shabbos, so those squeezing them, that's completely deraisa. Then there's a middle category, stuff that commonly that are not grapes or olives, but we make juice out of them. So for our days, let's say oranges. People squeeze oranges. So that's, I forget the exact details, but that's an intermediate case. And then there's stuff, the other fruits that people don't really care about the juice if it's seeped out. So that in regard to Shabbos, there's halachos related to that. But Rabbi Yitzchak says that we're not allowed to use the egg that was laid on Yom Tov as a gzera in case we would use the juice that would seep out of fruits and we would want to squeeze a fruit, which squeezing is one of the third halachos for Shabbos. And whether you're allowed to do it on Yom Tov or not is, we'll maybe discuss part of it, not completely today. So the reason that Beis Hillel forbids it is a special gzera, and Beis Shammai holds we don't need this gzera. So Amarle Abaye said to Rabbi Yitzchak to ask a question against it. Mashkim shazavu taimamai gzera shema yischod. So why is it forbidden to drink the juice that flowed out of a fruit by itself? It's xera. Maybe you're going to squeeze the fruit more to get more juice out. He goof xera. That itself is already xera. We mentioned that xera is a decree to strengthen the Torah, but one of the things is we don't make a fence around a fence. If we already made a fence, we don't need to make a second fence around it. And we're going to get up and establish another gzera around the gzera. So the Gemara answers like it did for Rav Yitzchak, for Rav Yosef, kula chad gzera. No, it's the same gzera. We don't want you to squeeze, so you can't take the egg, you can't drink the juice that flowed out by itself. Okay, so those are the four. That's the fourth explanation for why Beis Hillel says it's forbidden. Or in the first case, why Beis Shammai held it was mutter. Okay, so now the Gemara says, Kulu Rabbi Nachman lo Amri Kikushion. So we had four explanations. So why didn't the other three Amoraim hold like the other Amora? So the first opinion that we had that Beis Shammai is extra lenient in regard to Muktzan Yantif because is right. So we said that even according to Beis Hillel, but even though Beis Hillel is lenient, basically Beis Hillel is more strict for Muktzah on Yantif than they are on Shabbos, because Shabbos, everyone knows how important Shabbos is, and they're not going to make a mistake. But we need to keep Yantif strong, and so we're stricter on Yantif than on Shabbos. So, but because of the question, we said according to Rav Nachman, Beis Shammai should allow you to shech the hen itself, even though it was a hen that you owned to lay eggs, but it should be able to change on Yantif. So because of that question against Rav Nachman, that's why Rav Yitzchak, Rav Yosef, and Rabbi didn't hold like his answer. So by the way, there's a machlokas amoraim. There's a machlokas amoraim. Not amoraim. A machlokas achronim. What if Yantif is Yantif falls out on Shabbos? Would Beis Hillel be extra strict because Yantif we have to be strict, or would they be lenient because it's Shabbos, and Beis Hillel on Shabbos says Shabbos doesn't need a extra uh, to be strict to keep Shabbos because it's already Shabbos. So there is a machlokas achronim if Beis Hillel is strict on Shabbos or not. Um, Not that my opinion is important, but once it's already Shabbos, you can't do any of the preparations for the meal that you could do on a regular Yontif. You had to cook already before Shabbos. So to me, it would seem that it's pashut that Beis Hillel would not be strict because even though it's Yontif, but it's already a Shabbos day. So because you can't do these preparations, you don't need to do the extra safeguards for Yontif. That's my 2 cents, which is not even worth 2 cents. But there is a machlokas achronim about that, and that's important to mention. Okay, so back in the Gemara, Karaba Nami Lo Amri Hachana Leis Lehu. So Rabba's explanation, the second explanation, is that Rabba held that Beis Hillel was strict because Beis Hillel holds that there's a special, because Rabba holds that there's a special din that you have to prepare for Yantif the day before Yantif. And this is talking about a case where Yantif was on Sunday, but the egg was formed inside the chicken on Shabbos, so it wasn't formed properly. So that's Rabba's own special, unique opinion. So no one else would explain it that way because they don't hold like Rabba. El Rav Yosef, my Tamil Amr Rabbi Yitzchak. Why do Rav Yosef, who held that that Beis Hillel is extra strict, it's only from a rabbinic standpoint because we're worried that if you would use this egg that was laid on Yantif, you might take fruit that fell off a tree on Yantif. So why did Rav Yosef not like Rav Yitzchak's opinion? Rav Yitzchak was the juice that flowed. We make a zera that we can't use the egg because it's xera. If we use the egg, that people would drink the juice that flowed out of a fruit by itself on Yantif. So Amar Beitza uchla uperus uchla lafuke mashkin lav uchla. So Rabbi Yosef used his case of fruit falling off the tree and not the juice oozing out of the fruit because an egg is a food and fruit is a food. And so we want to compare food to food, and we don't want to learn it like Rabbi Yitzchak from the juice that oozed out of a fruit because that's a juice, that's a liquid, not a food. I mean, it's an edible liquid, but it's not a food. So he compares food to food. For Rabbi Yitzchak, my time Amar Rav Yosef, and what's the reason that Rabbi Yitzchak doesn't say like Rav Yosef? So how come he uses the example of juice oozing out of a fruit, and he doesn't want to use the example of fruit falling off the tree by itself? So Rabbi Yitzchak would say because the Beitza is subsumed, or blua is like swallowed, but it doesn't mean swallowed the way we're swallowing. It's inside the chicken, and juice is inside the fruit. So we want to compare something that's inside something that flows out to something that's inside that gets laid out to exclude the case of Rav Yosef that the fruit is already we see the fruit. The fruit. It's on the tree. It's not inside the tree. So we want to compare something that the egg that comes out of the inside of the chicken to the juice that oozes out of the inside of the fruit. Now it is, I guess, appropriate to mention here that in regard to, I think it's a machlokas rishonim. Trying to remember who says what, and I'm not gonna. But squeezing fruit, some say it's a tolda of dush. Dush is threshing. So why is it a tolda of dush? Oh, I remember what we're talking about. So because you have to thresh the grain in order to get the outer layers and bran and kernel and stuff out in order to get the wheat that's inside. So too, you squeeze. So you have to squeeze the juice to get what's inside. Now some say so. Milking a cow is the Gemara or a Brisa in Shabbos says milking a cow is one of the malachos, but it doesn't say what the malacha is. So there's a machlokas rishonim what that malacha is. So I think Rabbeinu Tam holds it's rubbing because when you're squeezing the udder, you might if there's let's say some type of lesion there, you're going to wipe it off, and it's almost like erasing or smoothing. But I think the Rambam's opinion is that it's like it's the same it's told of dash of threshing the same way when you squeeze a grape and the juice of the grape comes out, you're squeezing the udder and something from inside the cow, the milk is coming out. So there is an idea of that, and that logic would not fit in with this, but because in that case we're going to learn well, we're going to learn milk that comes from the cow to juice that's oozing out of a grape. I mean, it's not a perfect analogy, but just something that we should understand how Rishonim uh, sometimes use or sometimes don't necessarily, because maybe we don't pass it this way anyway. These svaras, these uh, these logical these strands of logic. So I mean, milking the cow doesn't have to do with this, but there's some logic that might be similar or might be opposite. So again, I want to mention it. I took some notes. Let me make sure I'm not missing anything else I wanted to mention. Oh, okay. And before we go on, the Top Tosos talks about a very important idea over here, which is the Gemara really talks about it in the fourth or fifth chapter later on, but because Tosos at the top here of Gimel Amud Aleph mentions, it's important to mention it. So what malachos are forbidden on, oops, that's the wrong link. What malachos are forbidden on Yantif? Because we know, here it is. Because we know that we know we're allowed to cook on Yantif, but what exactly are we allowed to or not? So Tosos here mentions that not all of the No, fine. 11, I think there's 11 of the malachos have to do with uh with baking bread from planting it all the way through baking, because you have to plow, you have to plant, you have to harvest it, you have to uh thresh it, then you have to winnow it, and you have to grind it. So those malachos you could do before Yantif. So you're not allowed to do those on Yantif. But once it's ground, you're allowed to make a dough and knead the dough and bake it on Yantif. So Toso says not all of the 11 steps, just some of them are, some of those steps are. Uh, so the Rambam holds that stuff that could be done before Yantif has to be done before Yantif. So having fresh bread, making the dough on Yantif and baking it on Yantif, that's a higher quality bread than making it the day before. So that's allowed to be done on Yantif. But to harvest it and do all those other steps, or even to grind it, that's something that the quality doesn't get better on Shabbos. So that's has to be done before Shabbos. But it seems that the Rambam holds that that's only D'Rabbanan. Rashi is similar to the Rambam, but he says to do those things on Yantif would have been Isser D'Oraisa. Now, some Rishonim hold, I think the Rush hold that they're not inherently usser, like the threshing, the harvesting, and the grinding, things like that. But the Rush says if we'd allow it, well, there's two. The way the Rush says, I think, is you're making your day into a weekday day by doing all these types of work, and it's not going to be recognizable as a Shabbos day. So the Chachamim don't want you to do it on on Shabbos. Excuse me, on Yantif. Everyone holds you can't do it on Shabbos. And some Rishonim, I think it might be Iran, but I don't remember right now who says that, is that if some things you're only allowed to, so this is according to everyone, you're only allowed to to cook what you're going to need for Yantif. Well, we'll learn later on. There's some qualifications for that, but for the most part, you're only allowed to cook what you reasonably think you're gonna need. And harvesting and grinding, those are things where you don't do the exact amount you need. So because there's definitely gonna be more than what you need, it's rabbinically forbidden to do those acts on Yantif. And I'm not going to discuss at all the people who need their freshly ground coffee and they grind their own beans every morning. Um, no, I'm not going to talk about that. But that would be something a reasonably recent shaila based on some of these principles. Okay, so if you want to see more in depth about that, after you could look in the introduction of the art scroll to Beitza mentions these main opinions in the first part of the introduction. Okay, continuing in the Gemara. So we're just past halfway on Gimel Amid Aleph. I don't know where it is in the article. I'm sorry. So Va'af, the last word on the line is Va'af Rabbi Yochanan Savar Gzer Mishun Mashkin Shazavu. So now we had four explanations for the Mishnah, and the Gemara is now telling us that Rabbi Yochanan holds like the fourth, the Rabbi Yitzchak's opinion that you're not allowed to use the egg as a rabbinic decree, a gzera, because it's similar to juice flowing out of a fruit by itself on Yantif that we're not allowed to drink it. So we're not allowed to use an egg that got laid either, because if we would allow something that came out on Yantif, we might also drink this juice that came out on Yantif. How do we know that Rabbi Yochanan holds that that's an issue? The Rabbi Yochanan Rami Rabbi Yehuda Umishani. Because Rabbi Yochanan asked a contradiction between two different statements of Rabbi Yehuda, and his answer was basically this principle. Tanan, because we learned in a Mishnah, Ein sochten es haperos lahotzim mehem mashki v'myotzim me'atzman asurim. You're not allowed to squeeze fruits to get their juice from them, and if the juice oozed out by himself, they're forbidden to be consumed. Rabbi Yehuda mer im laochlin hayotz mehem moter v'im lamashkin hayotz mehem aser. Rabbi Yehuda says if you had this fruit to eat it as a fruit, the juice that flows out that oozes out is permitted. But if you had these fruits because you were going to make juice or wine, whatever, out of them, because they're already designated for that purpose, if the juice came out by itself, it is forbidden because we're worried that you're going to squeeze it because you already brought it into your house or whatever to squeeze it into juice. But if you brought it into your house, you said, I'm going to eat these grapes, I'm going to eat these oranges as a fruit. If the juice flowed out, we're not worried that you're going to change your mind and then squeeze them. So that was one statement of Rabbi Yehuda. So it seems that anything that's a food, according to Rabbi Yehuda, it's a food that's separated. So the juice that came out from a food is also considered like a food. We're minhu, but I'll ask a contradiction against Rabbi Yochanan. Excuse me, against Rabbi Yehuda. So va'od, I'm a Rabbi Yehuda. Rabbi Yehuda also said. So what's the also said? So Rashi explains, well, it's a Gemara in Eruvin, or a Mishnah in Eruvin, and it's actually about Rosh Hashanah. It's uh so the first statement of Rabbi Yehuda, which our Gemara doesn't quote, Rashi brings that Rosh Hashanah, if so, it's a machlokas if Rosh Hashanah was 1 day or 2 days, even the time of the Beis Hamikdash. It's relevant because Rosh Hashanah is coming up, but it seems that for much of history, even in the time of the Beis Hamikdash, they had 2 days of Rosh Hashanah, and there wasn't 1 day of Rosh Hashanah. So the question is it 2 days, two different sanctities, or is it one sanctity? We paskin that it's one sanctity, and it's just considered one long day. But Rabbi Yehuda's opinion was, that it was two different sanctities. So So this is if you wanted to travel in different directions, so an Erev Tchumen. So you would need, if you made an Eruv that you wanted to extend to be able to travel 2,000 amos, let's say, to the west, if you made that Eruv before the first night of Rosh Hashanah, that would work for the first day of Rosh Hashanah, but it wouldn't work for the second day of Rosh Hashanah because the second day is a separate Kedusha. So the Eruv,
I gotta let Alan.
what?
I gotta let Alan in.
Okay. So the Eruv Tchumen to allow you to go 2,000 cubits beyond the city limits uh, is only good for that day. So it only worked for the first day of Rosh Hashanah, not for the second day of Rosh Hashanah, because according to Rabbi Yehuda, these 2 days are two different sanctities. But we don't know which is the day that's really Yontif and which is the day that's really weekday. So you'd have to make one Eruv before the first night of Rosh Hashanah, and you'd need to make another Eruv before the second night of Rosh Hashanah that would work for the second day. And if the first day was Yontif, the second day was really Yontif, looking back in retrospect, the second Eruv didn't need to be made at all. And if the first day ended up not being Rosh Hashanah, it was regular, it was only, the 30th day of Elul. So then that day didn't need an Eruv, but then the Eruv you made the next day worked for that other day. So that's the first statement of Rabbi Huda. So let's wait for Craig to come back. Okay, so that was statement number one from Rabbi Huda. So Va'od Amar Rabbi Huda, this is the fifth line from the bottom on Gimel Amid Aleph. Rabbi Huda also says, Masna Adam al Kakala shel Peros b'Yom Tov Rishon va'ochla b'Sheni. So the halacha is you're not allowed to take truma or meiser off of food on Shabbos or on Yantiv. You're fixing it. It's not able to be eaten. And now by taking truma off, you're changing the status and making it. So what if it's 2 days? If so, for the 2 days of Rosh Hashanah, you want to eat this food and you didn't separate truma before. So Rabbi Yehuda also said the same way you have to make an eruv for 2 days for both days. You can make a conditional separation of truma. So on the first day of Rosh Hashanah, you'll say if today uh, if today is really a weekday, I'm separating this part as truma. And if it's a weekday, excuse me, if today's a weekday, this is what happened. And if it's Yontif, what I said has no effect. And then on the second day, you do the same thing in reverse. You say if today's a weekday, I'm taking off Truma and Meiser off of this. And if today is Yontif, that means that yesterday was a weekday, so the truma I took off yesterday was good. So either way, now today on the second day, I can now eat this produce because the truma is definitely separated now. So you couldn't eat it on the first day, but on the second day, definitely the truma was either taken off on the first or the second day. So v'chein, and similarly, Rabbi Yehuda says in the Mishnah, v'chein beitza shnolda barishon te'elcha b'sheni. And if an egg was laid on the egg wiser was born on date, the egg was laid on the first day of Yantif, you could eat it on the second day. So b'sheni in barishon lo. So Rabbi Yochanan pointed out you could only eat it on the second day, not on the first day. So from that perspective, we see that so this is a problem because the first Mishnah that we quoted, Rabbi Yehuda held that if you had this fruit, let's say you had grapes that you were going to eat as a grape, if the wine, if the juice of the grape oozed out by itself, you're allowed to drink it on Yantif. Since this is a food, it's a food that's separated from food. But according to that logic, this doesn't make sense. If a chicken laid the egg on Yantif, you should be able to eat the egg on that first day of Yantif also, not on the second day. So how come Rabbi Yochanan Rabbi Yehuda is strict about not using the egg, but he's lenient about drinking the juice that oozed out of the fruit? So Umeshani Rabbi Yochanan Muchlefes Hashita. So Rabbi Yochanan says we have to switch in the first Mishnah that you're not allowed to squeeze the fruit, and if they came out by themselves as usher. Rabbi Yehuda says that if you had it for food, then you're allowed to drink the juice because it has the status of food and food that's separated. So in that opinion, we have to switch that the Tanakama's opinion, what we have written is the first opinion is really Rabbi Yehuda's opinion, and the Tanakama, the Rabbanan, hold the other way. So Rabbi Yehuda in that case is stricter. So then there's no contradiction. That's what Rabbi Yochanan explained it. So now it ends up that the gzera about not eating the egg that was laid on Yantif is similar to not drinking the juice of a fruit that oozed out by itself on Yantif. That's what the Gemara just said here. That was to show that Rabbi Yochanan hold that we're not allowed to use the egg on Yantif, just similar to the fact that we're not allowed to drink the juice of a fruit that oozed out by itself on Yantif. From the fact that he asked the question that it's a contradiction in regard to the drinking the juice that flowed out by itself, that oozed out by itself, and that using the egg, we see that it's the same halacha. So that's what the Gemara says. Okay, now we'll turn to Gimel and base 3b1. Now the Gemara is going to give two different explanations to this contradiction between Rabbi Yehuda's these two different laws of Rabbi Yehuda. The first one we just said was Rabbi Yochanan, and that was related to Rabbi Yitzchak's explanation of our Mishnah. And now we're going to have two other explanations that aren't related to our Mishnah, but once we gave one answer, we're going to give more answers. So the very top of 3b1. Ravina Amar Liyolam Lo Tepach, Rabbi Yehuda Lidivram Derabbanan Kamar Lahu. Ravina holds that keep the gears the way it is, that Rabbi Yehuda seems to be lenient in regard to the juice that flowed out, but that's not his own personal shita. Ravina says when Yehuda says it should be allowed, he's saying according to you, Rabbanan, you should hold that that it flows out of a food. So if it's a food, this is also a food, and you should be allowed to have it. Lididi afilu barisho nami sharia dochelas the uchla defrasu. Excuse me. In the second Mishnah, Rabbi Yehuda has the more lenient opinion, and in the second Mishnah, when he says that the Chachamim wouldn't, that you can't use the egg except on the second day, he said, I hold even on the first day you're allowed to eat it. But you, according to the Chachamim, on this. But you should at least, you Chachamim should at least admit to me that you'd be allowed to eat an egg that was laid on the first day of Yantif. You should be able to eat it on the second day of Yantif because it is two separate Kedushos. The Amile Rabbanan, and the Rabbanan's response would be, Lo, Kedusha Achasi. It's one sanctity, the 2 days of Rosh Hashanah. And we definitely paskin that the 2 days of Rosh Hashanah nowadays are one sanctity. I guess you could, so maybe we'd say that the machlokas there is in the time of the Beitza Mikdash, when then generally they had Rosh Chodesh based on testimony. Was it still in those days, the 2 days of Rosh Hashanah, two different sanctities or one sanctity? Okay, let's continue. Ravina Braid Ravula Amar. So now this is a third explanation to the contradiction between Rabbi Yehuda and Rabbi Yehuda. The first was Rabbi Yochanan's, the second was Ravina's, and now Ravina Braid Ula. Hacha b'Tarnagolos Hamedas Legagal Beitzim Rabbi Yehuda l'Tamei the Islay Muktzah. We're talking about a case that the reason that you can't eat the egg that got laid on the first day of Yantif, on the second day of Yantif, even though it's a different kedusha, is because it's a chicken that you have to lay eggs, so therefore it was muktzah on the first day. So just like it was muktzah on the first day, the egg is muktzah on the first day. But and because Rabbi Yehuda himself has a stricter opinion of muktzah. But on the second day, this egg is from the first day, not the second day, so you'd be allowed to eat it on the second day. Okay, so those were the three opinions about the contradiction against Rabbi Yehuda and Rabbi Yehuda. And the whole reason we mentioned that is because the first answer, which was Rabbi Yochanan's, is directly related to the fourth interpretation of our Mishnah. So it's a little bit confusing, but as a quick way of when you're chazering, when we're reviewing this, our Mishnah had four answers, And then the fourth answer, we had this other contradiction of Rabbi Yehuda, which had three answers. And the first of the three was the same as the fourth answer of our Mishnah. Okay, Mesave. Now we're asking a question against the interpretations of our Mishnah. We're going back to our original Mishnah, the egg that got laid on Yontif. Beis Shammai says it could be eaten. Beis Hillel says it can't. We had four explanations why either Beis Shammai is super lenient or Beis Hillel is extra strict. That really it should be allowed to be eaten, but either Rabbi says because he has the special halacha that food has to be prepared before Yontif, and then Rav Yosef was it's Xera, you can't use the egg because it's Xera in case fruit would fall off the tree on Yontif. If you would, we allowed you to eat the fruit, you then were worried you're going to pick a fruit, so you can't take an egg that was laid either on Yontif. And the last explanation was Rav Yitzchak. It's like fruit juice that oozed out of a fruit. If we allow you to eat the egg, you might drink the juice that oozed out of the fruit by itself on Yontif. So it's derabbanut. So echad beitza shenolda b'Shabbos, echad beitza shenolda b'Yom Tov, ein metatlan osa. So if an egg was laid on Shabbos or Yontif, you're not allowed to move it. It's muktzah because it was created on Shabbos. You're not allowed to move it. Lo lechasos v'asakli. So in those days, they didn't have good caps. Sometimes they would stick extra parchment or a small material that either ripped from a clothes, whatever, they would stick it in the thing as a bottle top. But if you had a slightly bigger thing, you could put an egg on there. It would keep anything bad from falling into the bottle. So this mission is saying you're not allowed to use the egg because it was laid on Shabbos or Yom Tov. You're not allowed to cover a bottle with it, even though that's a constructive purpose. But the point is, this egg is muktzah because it was laid on Yom Tov for Shabbos. V'lo lismach b'kari amita, and you can't lean your bed on it. Why would you lean an egg on your bed? So to engineering, Rashi says eggs are so strong. If you'd have the egg upright, it can hold a lot of weight. So you'd use so it's an engineering advice over here, but even though it could be useful, no, it's muktzah because it was laid on Shabbos or Yontif. Haval kofel avasakli b'shvil shelo tishaver. You're allowed to bring, let's say, a pot and cover the egg so that the egg doesn't get stepped on and ruined. So Tosfos points out that why do you need to say this? That you might think that you may not, that because this is muktzah, you couldn't move something else to protect the muktzah. And so this is teaching us that you're allowed to move something to protect the muktzah. And that's what we need to be taught. Usfeka asura. And if there was a doubt, at this point, Rashi says that the doubt is if we don't know if this egg was laid today on Yontif or maybe it was laid yesterday on Erev Yontif, you have to be strict and not use it. And if this egg got mixed up with 1,000 other eggs, they all remain usher and there's not bittul. So before I finish with the Gemara, with what the Gemara is asking from here, we're going to be talking about bittul. Bittul means nullification. Now we are used to if milk or butter would fall into your chicken soup, we have bittul b'shisha. You nullify one part in 60. The reason is because for those type of things, you can't have the taste of the milk and the fleshik together, and according to the Machaber, if you'd have a chef who would have to be who's very good at tasting tastes, if he would taste it and he say, I don't taste any butter in this soup, you'd be allowed to use it, even if it was less than the ratio was, let's say, only 1 in 50. There's a higher concentration, but he doesn't taste it, and he would have certain reliability. It has to be a non-Jewish cook, because if it's a Jewish cook and he tastes up and it ends up that it had a taste of milk and meat, then it's He couldn't have eaten it. So it's a non-Jew, but because he's an expert chef, he would lose his reputation if he would tell you something that wasn't true. So that's normally we think a bittul is 1 in 60, but that has to do with taste. Rashi points out that midiraisa, if we're dealing with salads, bittul is just with rove. If you'd have two pieces of kosher meat in it, well, we're going to get there's a whole different shaila, but but actually, okay, so the source is where you have three judges judging a case, we follow the majority. So 2 out of 3, so you follow the majority. That's deraisa. And then and then there's other bittul we're gonna see, like for truma, the ratio is 1 in 100. If truma falls into non-truma stuff, and so there's other type of bittul, and then there's certain things that bittul doesn't work. Bittul doesn't work if something is a whole creature. So let's say a bug falls in because it's a whole bug. A bug, because that's the way it's created, it has a certain chashivos, a certain significance, and it can't be batal. If you put a spice into a certain dish because you want the taste of the spice, if it ended up that this spice was forbidden for a certain reason, even though it's less than 60, it wouldn't be nullified because it gives taste. That's what a spice is. You don't need to put in that much to get taste. So that's something else. What our Gemara is, sometimes it's a shaila if min b'mino. Let's say you have, well, assuming that this is, let's say you have treif meat and kosher meat. Meat tastes like meat. There's no qualitative difference in the taste between the not kosher meat and the kosher meat. So if it's min b'mino, something falls into the same type of it, you can't distinguish the taste. So in that case, you might be stuck and not be able to get it nullified. Two things that our Gemara is going to mention right now is davar sheishel matirin. So if something is eventually going to become mutter, for example, chametz on Pesach. If you had some chametz that fell into your chicken soup on Pesach, even if it's 1 in 1,000, it's not nullified, because if we wait till after Pesach, the chametz is going to become mutter, so there is no bittul. That chametz doesn't get nullified. And another form of something that wouldn't get nullified is if something instead of is always sold by number. In eggs, where the good Gemara is going to talk about that right now, something that you sell always by the number can't be batal because it has a special chashivas, a special significance. And we never sell, we always sell eggs by the dozen, by a number. We don't sell it by quantity, by a weight, or by any other thing. Now, something that I don't think it's come to a level of a shaila yet, but Jewel, the fruit markets still sell red peppers and stuff by the pound. But Jewel now and Mariano's, they're selling peppers by the unit. When it's $1.99 per pepper, it's not even per pound of peppers. So we're not at a level yet where it's a shaila though. Do we sell peppers by the unit? We're not there yet. We won't be there for a long time. But a certain case where things are changing in the world, we're almost at the change now. But in regard to power of cheese, or the halacha is that if you have a power of cheese, a fake cheese, or the Gemara talks about you use almond milk in a chicken, so it looks like milk kind of. So you would need to put whole almonds in it, so people realize, oh, the milk that's in there is from almonds. It's not cow milk. So people shouldn't think that you're doing something wrong, that you put milk in the chicken. And then it's a more recent machlokas. If you put it on the package, is that okay? So you need to have the package out. The fact that the caterers say that at weddings that the margarine is margarine and not butter, that's already a bigger thing because it's not a package and it's not the ingredients of the butter, but many posts can rely on that. But nowadays that power of cheeses are much more common. Do we still have to say, oh, by the way, this is power of cheese? Or nowadays that we have Impossible Burgers, you say, oh, it's a power of burger. So we're not yet at the stage where everyone knows it's power of, but this is something that we're in the process of seeing because of the chemistry of food and whatever the way that we use that we're getting towards a place where the halacha might change because the facts on the ground have changed a lot. They haven't changed enough yet because halacha doesn't change, but but the facts on the ground could change, and the way society, the way we manufacture this and things like that, and the fact that people are willing to use this fake meat or the fake cheese. So that's something that might come up in a few more years as a Shiloh. We're not there yet, but that's, and again, it's not the halacha changes, but because everyone knows that that everyone has power of cheese around, which we're not at that level yet, but it's something that's been changing a lot over the past 10 years. So I'm just mentioning that, not that it's related to our Gemara, but in regard to the fact that certain things that were always sold by the pound are now, some stores are selling them by the item. It's something to just be aware of, but there's no change yet of how we have to paskin for certain things yet. Okay, so those are some ideas about bittul, nullification. So the brisa that we just quoted. So we'll read this again. Mesave. So we're asking against, there are four explanations of our Mishnah. Echad Beitza shnol b'Shabbat, echad Beitza shnol b'Yom v'Metaltel l'Sof l'Chatzos v'Sakli v'Los v'Val b'Karamita v'Kofal l'Zakli b'Shvil Shalot Tishav v'Sveika Shrabim Nisaver Elf Kol Nasuros. So if an egg was laid on Yantif, you can't use it you can't put it on top of your bottle as a cap because it's muktzah. You can't lean your bed frame with it. You're allowed to cover it with something else so no one steps on it and breaks it. If it's a suffix, you don't know if it was laid today or yesterday, it's forbidden. And if it got mixed up with other eggs, they're all forbidden. So Bishlam al Rabbi Amr Mishum Hachana Havisveka Diraisa V'Chosveka Diraisa L'Chumra. So of our four explanations of our Mishnah, the second one was Rabba, who holds that there's a special din that you have to prepare your Yantif food on Erev Yantif. And our Mishnah is talking about a case where the egg was laid on Sunday, and so the egg was formed inside the chicken on Shabbos, so it was not formed on a weekday. So in this case, it's a diraisa reason why this egg is forbidden, and therefore v'chol sfeika diraisa l'chumra. So when we say it's a suffix, if it's a doubt, you have to be strict. Now here, there's a very important fundamental machlok between the Rambam and the Rashba. So when we say if there's a doubt in a halacha that's a diraisa, we have to be strict. If there's a doubt in something that's only durabanan, we could be lenient. For example, brachos, almost every bracha is only durabanan. So we have a principle, suffix durabanan, suffix brachos lahakel. If you have a suffix, if you have to make a bracha in the case or not, we don't make the bracha because it's only rabbinic, so we're lenient. But if something is diraisa, did I say kriya shema, or did I put on tefillin today? It's a suffix diraisa, so I have to do it again. I have to put on tefillin because maybe I didn't put it on before. It's a suffix diraisa. So the Rambam holds that suffix diraisa is l'chumra only on a rabbinic level. The Torah says if it's a suffix, you don't have to worry, you don't have to be concerned it's a suffix, but the Rabbanan says, oh, because it's something of the Torah, we have to be strict. And so suffix dirabanan, suffix diraisa l'chumra. Whereas the Rashba and the Ran, they're both in Sanhedrin, but in Kedushin, but the Ran is in the end of the first parak, and the Rashba is in the fourth parak. They hold that suffix diraisa l'chumra is midiraisa. You have to be strict. Midiraisa, you have to be strict on the diraisa. So we can understand why, according to Rabbah, the second of our four explanations of our Mishnah, that suffix, if the egg is really from today or not today, we have to be strict because it's a suffix diraisa. Elo Rabbi Yosef or Rabbi Yitzchak, the Amri Mishum Gzera Sveka Derabanan Hivachos Sveka Derabanan Lakula. But according to our last two opinions, Rabbi Yosef and Rabbi Yitzchak, Rabbi Yosef was that you can't use the egg that was laid because we're worried that if a fruit fell off the tree on Shabbos, you might pluck it. You might use that fruit, and then you might pluck a fruit which is definitely asur diraisa. And Rabbi Yitzchak's opinion was you can't use this egg because if you use the egg, you drink the juice that oozed out of the fruit by itself on Yantif. Those are only rabbinic, and a doubt of rabbinic is lenient. So how come this Mishnah says, or this Brisa says that if there's a doubt if the egg was from Yantif or not, you have to be strict? It doesn't make sense. So so Seifa son l'safek treifa. So when we talked about suffix, we're not talking about a doubt if it was laid on Yantif or an Erev Yantif. Here we're talking about we don't know if the egg was a treifa or not. Normally we think the chicken was a treifa, but I think Rashi doesn't explain it that way. Rashi says it's a suffix if the chicken was a treifa, it had some type of injury or disease that it was going to die. So because the chicken isn't kosher, the egg that would come from that chicken isn't kosher either. Now, in general, um, well, we have a special heter that we could eat eggs and milk. Because normally if you Avram and Achai, we can't have something from an animal when it's alive, but we're allowed to drink milk. And the question is, maybe this animal is a treifa. So for that we use rove, because majority of animals are not treifos, it's not a problem. Um, but about 30 years ago, in the mid to late 90s, there was a big problem with Chal Yisrael milk, or maybe not just Chal Yisrael, but Chal Yisrael also is that the cows were in a lot of pain because they had too much gas and they weren't able to pass the gas. So they took needle and poked a hole in one of the stomachs of the cow to release the gas. Now, a hole in the stomach is an injury that would make a treifa, and this practice was so widespread it was gonna mess up the rove, and we're going to say that we weren't able to say that the majority of cows that were milk that were we were getting our milk from were weren't trephos because with a hole in its stomach, it would have the halacha of a trephos. So I don't remember the details. I was pretty young then, but at a real shiloh that came up in regard to trefa with animals. So chicken, it's harder to know. It's a smaller animal if there's a trefa, but there we had reason to assume maybe we thought it broke its leg or something. I don't know. So it would have a status of a trefa. I like this answer. It says Ihachi ema seifa nisarva be'elef kula nasros. Okay, so the first few halachos we're talking about an egg being laid on yantif. Now this you're saying is doesn't have to do with yantif, it just has to do with the treifa. But then after it had another case, and that's if it was mixed up with 1,000 other eggs, they're all forbidden. Iya mar bishlam asafik yantif, safek chal havi davar sheisham atir v'chal davar sheisham atir nefil abel flabato. So if that last case in the Mishnah about being mixed up is talking about we're not sure if it was laid on yantif or not, it would make sense if that halacha was talking about being laid on yantif. And if that was being laid on yantif, then the previous case also had to be talking about an egg. We're worried about the egg being laid on yantif, not that an egg was laid from a suffix treifa. Because in all 4 or 5 of these cases in this Mishnah are talking about an egg laid on yantif. Now, why does the last clause have to be talking about an egg being laid on yantif? Why would one egg mixed up in 1,000 not be nullified? Because it comes from the category, and this is why I gave the short introduction about bittul, of davar sheish l'matirin, something that's eventually going to be permitted. Now, what example did I give you? Chametz on Pesach, because when Pesach is over, this chametz is going to be permitted again. Now, the fact that we don't use chametz shavuot Pesach, that's a knas, that's a rabbinic punishment that people say if you didn't that Chachamim gave to people. If you don't get rid of your chametz, we're not allowing you to use it ever again. But midiraisa, after Pesach, you're allowed to use the chametz again. So, in regard to yantif, the egg that was laid on yantif, you can't use on yantif. But if you wait till after yantif, once you have it after Havdalah, you're allowed to use the egg again. So we understand why this egg that was laid on yantif, it got mixed up with 1,000 other eggs because it's davar sheish l'matirin. All the eggs are forbidden until after yantif, then they'll be permitted again. But if you say that the egg came from an animal that we have a doubt if the chicken was a treifa. Now, if the chicken was a treifa, it's a suffix diraisa. Because treifa is also midiraisa. But davar sheish l'matirin he v'tibata el beruba. Treifa is a davar she'ein l'matirin. If something's a treifa, it can never be permitted again. So if something that from that category got mixed up with something else, it is nullified. You don't need it could be nullified. But so now the Gemara tries to assume a different answer and push it away before you give this explanation. And if you want to say an egg is important and it can't get nullified because then it depends on a different machlokas. So when you think I mentioned, and this is why I mentioned it, in Bittul, if something is only sold by the unit, it has a special significance and it can't be nullified. So there's a machlokas, is things that are usually sold by the number are important and will never be nullified. But if we say only things that are only ever 100% of the time sold by number, then if it's not always sold by number, then it could be nullified. Because Rashi says, even though most of the time you only sell eggs by the number, but once in a while you'll take a pile and you say, I think it's a dozen, but you didn't actually count it out. So what category do eggs really fall into here? It's not, because we learned in a Mishnah. Misha in Orla. Misha haylo chavile tilson shel kalai hakerem. So kalai hakerem is if you planted something, vegetables or grain, but too close to a vine, it's a problem of kalayim. It's a shatnez is a form of kalayim. I think we spoke about it in the past few weeks, shatnez. So you can't mix the grapes with other things, and if you did, it's all forbidden. You can't even give it away. You can't feed it to an animal. It's forbidden to have any hana. You have to destroy it. You have to burn it. So if you had Tilson, Rashi in the Old French in the Art Scrolls is called fenugreek, but Rashi's in one place says it's a spice, in one place he says it's a legume. So maybe it's a legume that they ground into a spice, whatever. But fenugreek seems to be the exact Old French word that Rashi uses. So if you had fenugreek stuff that was kalayim that was planted too close to a grape plant, you have to burn it. Nisarvu b'acheros, but what if this mixed up stuff was b'acheros was mixed up into something else, and this new thing was mixed up into a third pile of stuff. So let's say you started with 10 items. The 10 items got mixed up in 100 other items, and the 100 other items now got mixed up in a total of 500 other items. So it keeps getting diluted, but if so, it doesn't get diluted enough that we can nullify it or not. So Rabbi Meir says no, because Kalai Kerem has to be destroyed, it can't be batal. Kulam yidleiku. All of this has to be burned. Diva Rabbi Meir. This is opinion of Rabbi Meir. Chachamim amrim yalu ba'achas masayim. But the Chachamim say it can be nullified if 1 in 200. So if there's a ratio of 1 a volume, whatever the amount is of the forbidden stuff, and 200 of the not forbidden stuff, so then you could use it. So it happens to be a machlokas on this. Rishonim. Rashi says you just have to take out the equivalent of 1 volume of this and burn that. And according to the Rash, who's a later Rishon, a little bit later than Rashi, in Orla, he says, no, you don't even have to burn that out. Because Rabbi Meir says something that you always count, it's Mekadesh in this case doesn't mean sanctified, but means it became completely forbidden. And the Chachamim holds no, only 6 things become forbidden. And Rabbi Kiva, and not everything. If it's not on this list, it's not important enough, and it could be nullified. Rabbi Kiva Mershiva. Rabbi Kiva says 7 ve'elohein aguzei prach, either nuts from a certain place or nuts that had a certain soft shell. V'rimone badan, and pomegranates from badan. Chavios stumos, closed barrels of wine. Once it's open, it's not so important, but if it's closed, it's very important. V'chalife tardid v'kilche kruv udlas yavanis, and a certain type of beets and certain types of cabbage and Greek squash. Now Rashi points out here. We just a couple weeks ago we did Daf Kuf Yud Aleph. We were talking about how great the produce of Eretz Yisrael is. It says someone had a certain cabbage and he had to climb up real high to get it. Rashi points out that in Eretz Yisrael these cabbages grew like a tree. And the Gemara that we learned a few weeks ago for this Klache Kruv in our Gemara on Gimel Amud Beis, it's the very first wide line. Those 2 words, Klache Kruv. Rabbi Kiva Mosef Avki Kershav Alabayas. Rabbi Kiva added homemade bread. A homemade loaf of bread is also important. It can't be nullified. I know I said we're going to go to 7, but we're in the middle of this thing. We just have to go 2 more minutes till we have a place where we could stop. So Harui la orla. So if any of these things were from a tree and they were within the first 3 years of it being planted, it has a din of orla, and it's forbidden to be used completely. It has to be destroyed. Harui la klei keren. And if they were planted close to a vine, then it's forbidden because of Kalayim. So Ve'idmar Allah, and about that we had a machlokas Amoraim. Rabbi Yochanan Amar Shedark Limano Shanino. Rabbi Yochanan says things that are usually sold by the unit, they are forbidden. Rabbi Shimon Lakshamer Kol Shedark Limano Shani. Anything that's usually so it's very difficult here from the Rishonim. The article will explain it, but Es Shadar Limanos and Kol Shadar Limanos, what exactly that difference is, Rashi doesn't really talk about, at least not that I see in Rashi. So according to Rabbi Shimon Lakish, we can understand the Mishnah quoting the eggs, that the eggs get mixed up on Yantif, that they're batal because because you usually sell an egg by a number, it can't be nullified. And this egg that was laid on Yantif or Savik laid on Yantif, it because if you wait till after Yantif, you'd be allowed to use the egg, but because it got mixed up in the other eggs, we're not allowed to use any of the eggs. According to Rabbi Yochanan, the egg should be nullified. So how come this Mishnah said that the egg is forbidden? Amar Papa, Haitana Tana delitro Ktsiosu. This is the author of this Mishnah was a Mishnah who is very strict in regard to if when you sell a liter, a certain amount of dried figs. So it's an extra strict opinion. It's not the one you normally follow, so the question can't be asked. We'll reread these few lines and continue on this next week, God willing. But we're out of time right now because we have to go to Mincha. Thank you for joining me on Zoom.